Our first scripture comes from Genesis chapter 45, verses 1 through 15. We're continuing the story of Joseph and his brothers in Egypt. Hear these words. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you that sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall settle in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, as well as your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my own mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring father down here." Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked to him. Our second verse comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 to 28. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came urging him and saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly.
We all know people for whom the glass is either half empty or half full. We all know people for whom life is either abundant or life is scarce. And in our stories for today, we meet both people, but it's surprising who we meet and who is which goes in which category. Joseph's been sold into slavery by his brothers. While there, he has dreams, and Pharaoh starts to really honor him and raises him up to a level of power. And all of a sudden, the tables have changed, and there is a famine. And his brothers come begging for food. And when they come begging for food, who do they meet? Do they think they're going to meet their brother they sold into slavery? Well, they hope not. But that's exactly who they meet. And Joseph recognizes them before they recognize him and transforms the whole event. He is so overjoyed to see his brothers. He's so overjoyed to first be able to ask the question, is his father still alive? Can he still see his dad once again? And then he brings them all in and takes care of them. You see, because of everything that happened to Joseph along the way, he wasn't a guy that had his glass half empty. He wasn't blaming his brothers for what they did. He wasn't angry necessarily with his brothers for what they did, because he saw the hand of God in this event. And when Pharaoh took favor of him, he saw how God was using him for good despite of what his brothers had done. And he lays that out for his brothers in such a beautiful way. You didn't send me here. You think you had power over me. You didn't have power over me. This is all part of what God had intended for this very moment, that I could be here for you. Now, I don't know how many of us, had we been sold into slavery by our brothers, would kind of see it that way. I think some of us might want to have a little bit of revenge on those brothers. I mean, shoot, I wanted revenge just when they locked me in the closet. And they did. Yeah. And you wonder why I am the way I am. But Joseph was able to see the hand of God working in his life and the way that he was able to transform the world for the good of his brothers and father and family, for his community. The glass was half full, and the opportunity had come for to use his gifts and his graces for his what he thought was the intended purposes. But the story about Jesus and the woman with the daughter is probably one of the most difficult stories of the Bible, because Jesus is the one who has his glass half empty. Jesus is the one who's living out of a theology of scarcity. The woman comes wanting him to help take care of his daughter. She has a demon, come heal his daughter, and he ignores her. How often in the Bible do we hear about Jesus ignoring somebody? He ignores her. And finally, the disciples want to do something, send her away. She keeps coming after, she won't shut up. And Jesus turns to his disciples and says, I have only come for the people of Israel, not the dogs. He called her a dog. You know, like that word for female dog. That's what Jesus said. And she said, but even dogs get scraps under the table. She transforms his thinking. He thinks he's only for this certain group, which is so out of character for Jesus. Jesus came for everybody. Jesus is always trying to get the disciples to think bigger, to be broader. And in this moment, Jesus is the one that has the theology of scarcity and says, not enough. No, didn't come for you. You're not part of this group. But she pushes just one step further. Just all I'm asking for is a scrap. Just a tiny little blessing. Not a big one, just a tiny little one. And Jesus sees in that request that her faith is great, because she's not asking for everything, just a little bit to help her daughter. You see, as we go through life, we find ourselves in all kinds of situations. And some of those situations are created by other people, some of those situations are created by ourselves. But like Joseph, there comes a time when he had an opportunity to practice forgiveness. And that's what he chose to do. He could have been resentful. He could have been really mean. He could have been really nasty. But he wasn't. He forgave his brothers for all that had happened. He transformed it into that wasn't their fault. It was God's plan. It's the way God wanted things to turn out. And he made it transformative in that moment. Now, I don't know if I was following Jesus and asking for just a little bit of a blessing, and he said, I didn't come to serve the dogs. I'm not sure how I would have responded to that. But the woman transforms that moment into, all I'm asking for is a little bit of a scrap from under the table. And all of a sudden, that whole relationship is transformed in the presence of the disciples. And who knows, was Jesus using this? Because we can't have a hard time saying mean things about Jesus. Was Jesus using this as an opportunity to teach the disciples that they saw what was going on? That they for once could maybe get it kind of right? No, they didn't get it right. Because they didn't say take care of her, answer her need. They said, tell her to get out of here. Get rid of her. But that conversation that first starts with the disciples and then the woman interjects into becomes a transformative moment. You know what? There is enough. Even if you're not part of our inner circle. Both of these stories, in their own way, are stories of forgiveness, are stories of transformation, are stories of hope. Because both of these stories start with a conflict. The brothers against Joseph, Jesus and the woman. And both of these stories end up with restoration and hope in the least likely place that you would see it coming from. Now, I think we all know at some level, forgiveness is hard sometimes. How do we forgive the person that continually harms us in one way or another? How do we keep going back for more, knowing that we're just setting ourselves up for yet another opportunity to be hurt? And I think that what happens in both of these stories is somewhat extraordinary. And we aren't always extraordinary in our behavior in life. But maybe what these stories help us to do is to maybe see the world in a different way. Rather than seeing all the harm done to him by his brothers, Joseph sees opportunity. Maybe by not always seeing the harm done to us by other people, we can change that around into an opportunity of how we can move forward that is healthier for ourselves and healthier for our community. It's not meant to be easy. If it was easy, I wouldn't even have to talk about it. It is difficult to forgive, especially when we've been hurt in so many different ways by certain people. But when we hang on to the hurt and the anger, who really gets hurt in that moment of hanging on to that? Joseph could have been very spiteful. And he might have even felt kind of good about that. But he chose a different path. And out of that path came love, forgiveness, and a completely new relationship for him and his brothers. If he had been spiteful and turned them away, he would have had power over them. But what would that power have done to his own heart? And where would that power have gotten him with his relationship with his father? It wasn't just about his brothers. It was about the broader family from which he came. It was about the relationship between him and his father. And that took precedence over revenge and anger. Sometimes when we hold that grudge, it's not just the person with whom we have a hold a grudge that's hurt in that relationship. It gets bigger and it grows. And what other relationships are we damaging when we can't find ways to transform and heal and forgive? Joseph didn't do it on his own. He saw God's presence in all that had happened to him. It wasn't just about him and his brothers. God was in that mix, working for resolution and transformation. And I think sometimes we get so stuck up in that one-on-one relationship, we don't allow God to enter into it. And then there is no transformation, there is no forgiveness. There's just anger. Who are we? And whose are we? And how important is that in our worst relationships, our most difficult relationships, to remember who we are and whose we are? God works within us and around us for love, hope, and transformation. But we have to open our eyes to see it and to acknowledge it, to be able to celebrate it. Amen.